Thank you again for having me. I'm going to the title of this talk is extending the concept of information architecture and design. And this talk uh, was previously given by myself to a closed audience. Um, uh, the presentation was titled Structural Logic and Semantic Formation, and the the very sweet looking gentleman on the left of the screen is Dan Klein. He's a big figure in North America in information architecture and user experience design um, for a variety of reasons. But he's been teaching a course in information architecture at the University of Michigan School of Information for yonks. I mean, I think it's about maybe 15 years or 20 years or something like that. And this year, earlier on this year, he asked me to create a series of three different pre-recorded presentations that I would give to his students for the University of Michigan, postgraduate students, looking at new ideas that I've been working on, maybe not so new, for the past 5 years or longer, regarding information architecture. And Dan really is a great person and an incredible character, but not he doesn't come close to the character, in inverted commas, that one might find in an individual such as Richard Saul Wurman, who's one of the fathers of information design and is pictured on the bottom right. And Dan has been kind of named the official biographer for Richard Saul Wurman. Wurman is credited with being one of the first people to come up with the term information architect. And Wurman is a pioneer of information design and information architecture. He also happens to be the individual who started the TED Talks. So, yeah, so interesting company. And the three different talks that I created for the School of Michigan dealt with different issues to what I'm going to be dealing with today, particularly in the extension of the next two. But if you really wanted to see these recordings, they are online on YouTube, and yeah, go and have fun. So I'm going to jump in. This talk should be understood as one emerging from a second intellectual culture to be found in the field of IA. I set up this thing of a first culture and a second culture within the community of practice and the theoretical space of information architecture in an article I wrote for the Journal of Information Architecture, which was called Footnotes to Array the Future of Information Architecture. And the way I kind of identify the difference between first and second culture is distinct from a first culture view of IA, which is one which understands IA as an applied library and information science concerned with the web and websites and bounded objects, mobile apps. Distinct to that, the second intellectual culture views information architectures as existent phenomena in the world, which predate digital technology and the internet. The second view recognizes information architectures as capable of affecting the human condition in terms far broader than those we associate with the first culture concern, limited to discrete, bounded digital objects. Okay, that's stage and scene setting. Part of the view of information architecture that I argue for in a variety of different places and also use in my own practice and such like is that is to say that any information architecture or any well-designed information architecture should be kind of, it consists of two parts. The first is structural logic and the other is semantic formation. Please don't worry about the big words. The the meaning of them hopefully will come clear. And a big part of the first half of this presentation is trying to make what they are and how they are different to each other clear to you guys. So just bear with me. The structural logic perhaps speaks for itself. Semantic formation, whenever you hear the word semantic, just think meaning. So I could have written meaning formation. To break these down a little bit further, structural logic refers to the ordered arrangement of parts, the formal structure or schema through which elements, for example, content, objects, processes, are related. It is logic in the architectural sense, not in the philosophical sense. That is how components are organized to produce coherence at the level of information structure. So it's compositional, right? It's like how we group and order and arrange things. Semantic formation, on the other hand, refers to the shaping of meaning that arises from or overlays that structural logic. It's how the formal structure is made intelligible, resonant, or meaningful, thus enabling not just sense making. So when somebody encounters a designed object, it's not just that they can understand it. It's that they can they can extract from it something more than just what it is. It's what it means to be. And that's a really important distinction. Continuing, structural logic is the logic of internal relationships between different discrete parts, often invisible but operative. So, for example, a sitemap, a hierarchy, a taxonomy, or a flow, the internal structure in the example of like a website. And the idea here is that it's necessary but insufficient for meaning. It enables sense making by constraining interpretation, but not meaning alone. Semantic formation, on the other hand, is the gestalt of the designed object, the whole that is more than the sum of its parts, where meaning emerges. A semantic interface that makes structural logic apprehensible to human understanding. And it's usually, and it's in fact always, heavily culturally loaded. It's contextual and rhetorical. It's tied to framing, discourse, design intent, and things like that. So to kind of try and summarize, structural logic would be the minimum structure required for coherence and navigation across parts. Semantic formation is the layer where structure becomes meaning, where form makes sense and becomes communicatively alive. So lots of words, and it's all a bit heady and so forth. But let me try and bring it down to earth. And I'm going to rather humbly show you a piece of design work that I did a very long time ago. But I'm choosing it, even though I did it a long time ago, because it makes the point that I want to make really, really clearly. So I'd been living abroad in the UK for quite a while. And when I came back to South Africa in 2004 or 5, I'd been working at some of the top agencies in London, having a great time, and I wanted to come home. And I decided I would start my own firm. I'd give it a go on my own. And one of the first clients I got was Volkswagen through a previous life that I lived in Cape Town working at Ogilvy Interactive. And Ogilvy, I don't know, I think they still have the Volkswagen account, something like that. Anyway, so I got the opportunity to kind of say, hey, I've got this way of doing, designing websites. And I ended up getting this project, which was super cool. So how can we start to see in a conventional example like this, what elements we might be able to point at and say, well, that's structural logic versus semantic formation. All right. So the structural logic in one way, the easiest way to kind of say, well, what is this internal thing? What is this organization of parts? In other words, the structure A sitemap, as we know, is probably the easiest way to reflect structural logic in a website when we mean um, internal ordering and organization. Semantic formation, on the other hand, in this example, would be the manner in which the interface communicates concepts involved in that internal structure in such a way that people can find meaning in their interaction with it through, in this case, the example of navigation. So the particular model that we're looking at is that element on the left-hand side. If one clicks beyond the homepage, that was the homepage that you were looking at. If one clicks beyond that, the three main areas, there are actually four, but three main areas are explore, maximize, and repurchase. In this example, a user is inside explore, and a second kind of level of navigation has emerged. So you're in explore, but it's helped me choose models, financing, servicing, OMGs, etc. Right. There's a relationship to the manner in which the navigation presents itself relates then to this internal ordering and organization, the structural logic. And you can actually see it, although the language is slightly different. This is actually the original sitemap. So explore refers to buyers. That element on the homepage initially, where it said just bought, start here to get going, that's new buyers. Over here, owners refers to maximize, repurchasing refers to repurchase. And then inside, for buyers, you see financing, warranties, etc., which is over here. Now, it's quite interesting to note that the labeling on the sitemap, in this particular version of the sitemap, doesn't correspond to what you see on the interface. It should, in conventional, when we normally work, you tend to like label the boxes in your sitemap as similar or as close as possible, referent as what the name is usually called in navigation or as the user sees it. The difference here is revealing in a positive way for me to make the point that I'm gonna momentarily. So there is a concept at play here, and there's an echoing. You should start to be able to feel or appreciate that the internal structure, the hidden sitemap elements, and what one sees on the interface are kind of mutually independent. Well, they can stand alone and they can make sense viewed through different lenses on their own, but that they're mutually dependent in a design that works. And what I want to try and the point I want to try and communicate here is that things like structural logic and semantic formation, which are IA concerns, they're compositional devices which deeply encode and bind meaning, not just on the surface, but intimately with the form and the content, as well as those surface factors such as interface. So it's the structure is as much a part of the meaning as anything that would be said on the interface. This encoding of meaning is limited neither to websites nor the particular kind of IA that we commonly associate with the design of websites, which is that kind of library and information science, information architecture, the one almost entirely concerned with principles or values such as findability. And this is important, and I'll come to explain it now. In an earlier paper that I wrote with my research partner, Terence Fenn, who I teach with at UJ. In fact, Terence is a head of department at the moment of the School of Multimedia um, Design in the Faculty of Art Design and Architecture. Terence and I write papers a lot, and we wrote a particular paper. It's in the bibliography or the references at the end of this talk, um, where we presented this idea that we can think about more than one type of information architecture. The quote reads, IA may be viewed as having three distinct but mutually inclusive dimensions amongst potential others, which we will term bounded, cross-channel, and poetic IA. I hope you like my timeline at the top. Um, Pervasive IA at the time of publishing was the most kind of recent form of information architecture to gain expression. Prior to that, we had the kind of library and information science information architecture, which emerged around 1997, written by, it's probably the best known book associated with information architecture, written by Peter Morville and Lou Rosenfeld, prior to Jorge Arango starting to co-author as well. And then you've got what I refer to as before IAA. So before there was even a word to describe information architecture, there's this vast expanse of time where, as you'll see, I argue that information architecture was always there and in the world, regardless of the fact that websites or digital technology hadn't been around. And if you're thinking, that's not IA, that's information design or something else, then please give me the benefit of the doubt. Try and change your mind. I'm going to run you through these very briefly. The information architecture of the World Wide Web that we understand from books like the Polar Bear book, I refer to as bounded IA. And these tend to address single spaces of interaction and experience. For example, a website, a mobile application, or internet. It may derive its content and functionality from one or more sets of data. However, they manifest in that single space, and the IA design is intended for that environment. In these circumstances, the use and purpose of the IA intervention is usually clear, and the design is often outcomes-based. This bounded IA needn't be limited just to digital things, and I'll make that point. But to get the ball rolling, I choose to start with the aspect that most people are familiar with. Cross-channel IA then offers models of structure and organization that endure across multiple environments and data sets, be they digital or non-digital. So this is much closer to service design, right? So a business requiring a pervasive information architecture that would span call centers, physical retail stores, a website, and mobile applications. And this is very well documented and detailed in the book, which I'm kind of half showing on the right-hand side, which is called Pervasive Information Architecture, Designing Cross-Channel User Experiences by Luca Rossotti and Andrea Rismini. And then there's this one, right? This was the kind of new contribution that in the paper that it emerged in, we were kind of offering. And I wanted to call it Poetic IA. And the description reads, And the description reads, Poetic IA is unbounded, without physical or digital context, and abstract in the sense that it is interested in the pure structure of data information, potentially abstracted from a distinct outcomes-based objective. It's principally concerned with composing meaning as an end in itself in an undirected yet structural, semantic, and ontological way. It's rare that we'll find examples of Poetic IA in a standalone manner, and yet the shift it provides to one's experience of new information formations and the meaning they hold is profound enough to warrant identification and categorization here. Okay, so poetic or unbounded information architectures, their essential operation, detached or removed from any usual sense of an object, is then purely the encoding of meaning in compositional forms which they have to embody. and thus become new concepts for the world. Now, this is abstract, and I've given this example before when I spoke at UX South Africa about 5 years ago. But this is probably one of the easiest ways that I can explain what I mean by a poetic IA. Consider three parts: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay? The parts, if the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that Gestalt logic, then the Holy Trinity, which is a fusion of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, constitutes a semantic formation, right? Now, the semantic formation, the Holy Trinity, emerges from the way in which the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit interrelate. In other words, there is a structural logic behind the Holy Trinity, the idea of the Holy Trinity. And there are two kind of parts to it. On the left, you'd see the Father is not the Son is not the Holy Spirit is not the Father. On the right, the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. Together then, the structural logic, which is a relational logic for the Trinity, and the semantic formation, a form for the Trinity concept, work together and come together to provide and communicate the idea of God, to manifest it. And this is what I would refer to as a conceptual information architecture, where poetic IA and conceptual IA mean the same thing. Okay. So the Father, the Spirit, the Father, the Holy Spirit, the Son is encapsulated within the Holy Trinity, and God becomes the emergent concept that we understand when encountering the Holy Trinity. The work on the left is a fresco painted probably between 1425 and 1427 by a really famous artist at the time called Masaccio. The reason why the work was so famous, in fact, was because of its three-dimensionality, the way you can see it, the tunnel in the background. But you can also see the Father in the background, the Holy Spirit, which is that white dove, and the Son. But here's the point. Before it was a fresco, it was an idea, right? In other words, the fresco does not define the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity is the subject matter of the fresco. Now, the fresco could have been about all sorts of things. And the point here is that conceptual information architectures or poetic information architectures, because they are abstracted from any object, it means that they're transportable. Okay, so where might one find the conceptual IA behind this design? Which is not to suggest that I consider the design to be godly, even though it was quite rockin' in 2005 or 2006. Okay, so I spoke about the fact that the semantic formation that we saw in that interface was explore, just bought, maximize, and repurchase. Okay. These are some of the original sketches that I did when I was putting together a strategy presentation for Volkswagen. And what you see here is pre-purchase, purchase, post-purchase, repurchase. This is really the concept behind Explore, Just Bought, Maximize, which is an incredibly classic customer lifecycle model or relationship model. It's your bog standard pre-purchase, purchase, post-purchase, and repurchase. Okay. In this sense, for the conceptual information architecture for the site, the semantic formation is then pre-purchase, purchase, post-purchase, repurchase, and the structural logic is now no longer the sitemap. It is those things which are of concern to the idea of that customer lifecycle model, which in truth is a very, very, very hard-nosed neoliberal business logic. So pre-purchase, for example, manufacture wants, not needs, position wants as values, marketing cycles. What is purchase? Cross-sell and upsell, work around the triple bottom line. Post-purchase, on-sell, incentivize preferred behavior, as rewarding loyalty, time financing, warranties and marketing, repurchasing, trade up, hasten repurchase, design in obsolescence, retain customers because they're cheaper to sell to. Those agendas become the structural logic, not just for the website, but any channel that is used by Volkswagen, their dealerships, etc. So the conceptual IA provides visibility of the portability of that concept. In other words, it's like trickle down theory for design. The logic of pre-purchase trickles down into the explore area on the website, purchase into just bought, etc. And thus, the semantic and related mechanics that are found not just in the object, the website, for example, but as things which pervade and are able to be transported across multiple environments. I'm hoping that this. I've decided to move quite fast towards the end because I think I'm going to run out of time. But what I'm trying to highlight here is that structural logic and semantic formation are kind of universal qualities of information architecture that allow for meaning to be encoded. And for different channels and different spaces and places, it allows them to make sense and cohere for people to pick up, to drop out of one space to go into another, to pick up from where you left off, etc. So the last kind of parting thought I want to leave you with is when one hears somebody like me saying information architecture has always been around and predates the web and probably as old as humankind, the first thing that people say is, that's not IA, that's information design, or that's interaction design. That's not IA, that's user experience design. It's not IA, it's service design. All right, let's just look at that then. Information design is something that we know is its own thing, its own field. Information design exists at like a object level of abstraction. And I bring Richard Saul Wurman back in because at least in information design, it's like known and acknowledged and understood that there is information architecture in information design. It is somewhat subservient to the broader agenda of information design, but it's there, okay? So here we've got a Wurman-esque information architecture. Let's move one level up in terms of object complexity from an infographic or a graph to a website or a mobile app. Here we start talking about UX design. And if we move up another level of abstraction, we get to a systems level where perhaps we get service design. Now, we've got relatively well-known forms of information architecture that are relatively well accepted in the main. In UX design, that kind of classical IA that I was referring to, and in service design, we've got Luca Rosati and Andrea Rosmini's pervasive IA. But observe what's starting to happen. Information architecture being present at multiple levels of abstraction as complexity and things, increase. The last might be what we would designate or call a space for design thinking. This is a concept level of abstraction. It's the highest level of abstraction that we tend to get to in design. And within this design thinking space, we could probably put that conceptual or poetic information architecture there. And it's at this point that even if one is skeptical and is happy to argue that at individual levels of abstraction, oh, that's not IA, that's interaction design, or that's not IA, that's UX, or that's not service design, that's not IA, it's service design. Well, there's a narrative going on here. We're seeing information architecture standing alone, being able to stand alone in these areas or across them. And, just makes you think, right? Are we joining the dots? Are we connecting the dots? Are we finding the concept between clicks? and using information architecture as powerfully as maybe we could be. Well, it makes me think at any rate. And that's it. GG.
Sorry, I was fighting with my mic.
Did
Thank
I
you.
sleep?
No, thank you, Jason. Thank you. And I think that was a lot for me to personally digest. Um, but I like the way I like that the last part where you were drawing the parallels um, between architecture and design, and I guess the arguments that exist. Um, I want to ask anyone. I mean, I see there's a. Let me just check. I think there's a question. Yeah, we've got a question over here. How? There's two questions. Okay, the second one I can share LinkedIn one. I will do that, Ashlyn. Um, so the other question is, how do you go about discovering these existing abstract structures that exist in order to bring them into a digital or custom experience? And how do you then map it when something that is in an idea or concept may differ greatly from person to person?
Is, is that an information? Is that a question about the information architecture? Um, and the reason why I say this is certainly there is a way of deconstructing, learning to see the structural logic and semantic formations in things is it's a kind of a language of its own. So if I look at a TV, or if I look at my heater, or if I look at the apartment that I live in, I'm able to um, I'm able to deconstruct and decode the space around me, um, in a sense, as sense making. So these things, even when they haven't been designed with those particular concepts in mind, there is just a way that design tends to work, or when design has been done well, which tends to cohere with the concepts of structural logic and semantic formation. But it is something which, as a so that's from a kind of a deconstructing the world, and unpacking sense making of other things. So a language of critique for information architecture could emerge from that, which is quite significant because we don't have one otherwise. Beyond saying, well, the information architecture is bad because people can't find anything. Um, on the other side, the idea that you would use structural logic and semantic formation as compositional devices to make something for users that, you know, would hopefully be better than not, and would be more powerful, would engage or connect with people in more explicit, and textured semantic or meaning ways. That aspect is the same as making a work of art, making a movie, doing UX design, in as much as one works to ideals in terms of structure and form, and you work through all the different scenarios, um, and all the different user types and all the different kinds of people that might use it. Information architecture, in that sense, doesn't stand separate to human centered design or user centered design. It should be better understood in a very old fashioned way in the early days of IA, um, before UX existed, where information architecture was often called the glue. It is that thing which sits between the code, the content, the graphical interface, all the way through to business propositions and marketing, the thing which made everything hang together in a way that made it stronger rather than more fractured without it, was what we called information architecture. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it kind of comes close. It's quite a complex question you asked.
Yeah, it's a bit of a biggie. Um, and I think, I mean, that was asked by Tanea, and maybe
Thanks for the question.
if Tanea does have any follow-up questions, I mean, please share them. Alternatively, I would suggest I have shared Jason's LinkedIn. You can connect with Jason as well. Um, See, there's a comment from Monet. Love your analogy. There's a best practice in UX design, user flows, which your talk reminds me of, which also relates, by the way, to your topic. What is your thoughts around user flows and its relevance in today?
Um, uh, User flows are, as you say, it's best practice. I'm not sure if when you talk about user flows, you're referring to um, task flows, and at a level down in granularity, then starts to become, like a, I don't know, level 6 or whatever they call it, process flow, um, or whether you're kind of leaning a bit more to the side of a user journey. So a user journey being um, basically a customer journey, but descriptive of experiences just in one channel as opposed to spanning multiple. It, yeah, um, but they are certainly useful in any of those scenarios. They're an absolute they're a cornerstone of how we conceptualize and build structure out, at least in terms of digital objects such as websites. If we want to stay with digital objects, between sitemaps, wireframes, and task flows, those are the three core tools that one tends to use, or one did in the old days, to build out a structure. Um, and they kind of help at different times and at different kind of from different perspectives in thinking through and building out a resolved kind of information architecture. So again, I'm not sure if I answered your question,
I
but
see, Jason, sorry
yes,
to
it's a big
interject.
thing.
I see Monet's commented and said specifically user journeys.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so that stuff for VW, for Volkswagen, the what I took to them as a proposal was customer journeys. So the first piece of work that I did back in South Africa was to work with the strategist on Volkswagen at Ogilvy, and she and I came up with what they now, these days are calling customer journeys. After having done that piece of work, we then went to a next level of detail down to figure out what the user journeys were going to be for the website, and then the website was designed off the back of that, and it was really successful. So there was about a sustained 300% increase in traffic and engagement on the Volkswagen site. I think for probably about at least a year afterwards, which is kind of insane results. And I would definitely attribute that directly to use of customer and user journeys. And that was a very long time. It was around 2005 experimenting with that stuff. So um, I think I mean, user journeys and customer journeys have become as ubiquitous as they are, even though people have started critiquing them, and as they should. But they become so ubiquitous because they just make so much sense to work with. I find as a designer, they're not everything. They're not the answer to everything either, but they're really powerful tools.
We've got another question. So the next question reads, when practically applying poetic IA, do you find that product teams understand it or buy into it? Or do you find that it's something that people push back on or ignore, wanting faster outcomes?
Mm. So when I do this kind of stuff with clients, I don't I don't go in to speak to my clients selling things that I would call, I wouldn't stand up in front of a client and go, hey, I want to talk to you about poetic information architecture, because they would just throw things at me and say, why have you come here to ruin our day? That's the language of poetic IA, cross-channel, etc. is language that I use both in my theory and when I'm talking to guys like you, like other people that are designers. It's not, that's not the language that I take to my clients. Um, when I speak to my clients, I speak their language. I talk about, I use the words that they understand. I I I discuss design in terms that they will understand, which might be anything from profit and loss to brand or to some kind of very specific and very niche content concern. Um, and I will weave things around that. It's one of the reasons why journeys, at least for me, were a real win, because in terms of selling this kind of stuff, um, because the logic of journeys, for the most part, for um, businesses, so for profit organizations, if you look at your customer journeys, all we tend to do, for the most part, is rename stages, all of which ultimately kind of map back to that classic four-stage cycle. And this is a pervasive model because that's how you make money. It's like marketing-led organizations. In fact, if you really want to do interesting journey work, you're very unlikely to find really radical innovation oriented work relationship uh, at that relationship model level, um, in the world of for-profit organizations. So if you go into the arts and culture sector, nonprofit sector, public sector, you get to work with much, much more interesting relationship models, and you tend to have a lot more freedom as well to be more inventive. And if you're designing those things, you can end up, putting designs into the world that really affect reality. Not just the things that users experience separate to themselves, like an app or a thing on a phone or a website. It's more like the world which we live in, where all of a sudden you're inside an information architecture, not looking at an information architecture, if that makes sense. And that kind of opportunity does exist for everybody. All of us designers, it's got to kind of go seek it out, or just get really bored of doing the same corporate stuff over and over again. But um, so yeah, I don't sell poetic IA and I don't sell cross-channel IA and stuff like that. I use different languages, and to be honest, I use whatever I need to get jobs, make money, or do good work and collaborate with other people. In that sense, I'm very maverick. I do what I need to do to get the job done.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to Maverick. Um, Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Thank you, everyone. Jason, again, thank you so much.
Sure, and please reach out if you want to ask me any questions. Contact me, email me. I'll take the time to get back to you. Bye.
Awesome.